Hello everyone, I am Rod and I am the game design instructor for the Academy of Entertainment Arts over at Dixie Hollands High School. If you are one of my students, it's Mr. Flowers to you, and welcome to this video tutorial. Welcome back. As you can see, we have our sand texture applied in Unreal, and it's looking pretty sharp. If I jump into Photoshop. So if you've been following along and you made this in the last tutorial, then you should be right along here. What I want to do this time around is create the like cobblestone or the rocky slabs that I have mentioned before. But we're going to be using this texture as a starting point. So hopefully you've already made this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new document. This is going to be T underscore, I'll say rock slab. I'm going to set this to 2048 resolution 300. Make sure that we are in color mode RGB color and 8-bit, and then hit OK. As soon as I get into here, I'm going to jump back to my sand texture. And if you haven't done this already, just go ahead and take your diffuse and right click, go ahead and merge it to get this single flat one here, and then grab your move tool. With your diffuse copy selected, just go ahead and drag this over. Center it up. I'm going to unlock and get rid of my background piece. And the reason I want this sand piece to be here is when we make our little bricks or our stone, we want this to kind of push through the sand, and we want to have the same sand color as we did in the previous. We don't want to have a different random sand color on top of each other, because that's just not going to look right. So from here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and name this diffuse. I'm going to name this one sand, just so I can remember it. And then up here, I'm going to name this one cracks. And for my cracks, all I'm going to do is grab a color that I want to use, and use black. Grab a little paintbrush. I'm going to pick a brush size. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw some cracks in. And you can make these kind of any way that you want, but I'm going to sort of come in from the side, make these sort of random bits. And what you want to do is go from one edge all the way clean through to the other edge. And it's important that you do it this way so that when we go to line these up, it's going to be a little bit easier. And then I'm going to come in. And they don't have to be like all jagged. They can be round, or they can be squared off. This one, maybe I'll come in and do it triangular. And give it an edge. I'm going to try to follow like a natural, somewhat organic shape going on. Let's see, let's try like a random shape here. You are the artist, so you can sort of make whatever you like. Alright, once I have something that I like, and we'll just say, yeah, sure, this will work for me. Once you have this, we have to check and make sure that this is going to line up correctly. So if I save this out real quick, File, Save As, make sure you put this in your game design folder. I'm going to do Targa, and come down There's my sand. Where over are you? There you are. So T underscore Rocky Slab underscore D for diffuse. Targa. Hit OK. 24-bit is what we're going for. We're going to jump over into Unreal. I'm going to go under my content, grab my textures folder, and I'm just going to re-import over my previous one. Let's see. Sure. I may or may not have made a few of these in the past. Get rid of this old one. So once you drag this in, and to not confuse you, I'll go ahead and get rid of these other pieces. That way you're like, hey, I don't have those. It's okay. So in here, I'm going to grab this, right-click, create material. Hit enter, let it bake. And while that's compiling, I will just go ahead and select my terrain. And then over here in my details tab, I'm going to scroll down and drag in this material. Let it compile. Okay, now that this is loaded in, you can take a look and see some of the problems that we might have. So like right here, when this texture lines up with the other texture, so right here's one complete texture. When this one lines up with the next one, we have this kind of seam here, and it's very obvious to see it right along the edges here. If I jump back into Photoshop, we go up to Filter, make sure we have our cracks layer selected, Filter, come down to Other, and then go to Offset. In our offset here, we can adjust how this picture is shown up. So I'm going to just type in 0 on both of these real quick. So 0, 0 is the texture by itself. Well, when I push this over, this edge here and this edge here are going to wrap around. So I think it's like kind of like a soda can. This edge is going to wrap around, and it's going to come around to the middle, and this edge is going to be pushed over here. So if our image is 2048, then halfway through would be 1024. So 1024, and that pushes halfway through. And you can see right here where the seam is and how it doesn't line up. So what we're going to have to do is make sure it lines up. So I'm going to hit OK. Grab my paintbrush, and I'm going to erase these just a little bit. My eraser, I'm going to push this back some, push this one back some, this one, get that one. Grab my brush again. I'm just going to connect the dots, basically. There we go. So that is our left and right, or our horizontal seam. So when this image tiles, it'll tile seamlessly. So that's the first one. I'm going to come to Filter. I'm going to hit Other and go back to Offset. Now when we do this, every time we set the offset, it will retain the value that we set previously. So last time we set 1024. So when we saved it, or when we hit OK, it remembers that we were at 1024 the last time. So it just popped it back in there, and it reshifts it over. If we were to type in 0, it would go back the other direction. So we're just going to leave this at 1024. I know that's kind of confusing, but just remember that every time you put this number in there, it gets updated to that value. So we just shifted it over another 1024. Vertical, we're going to check our top and bottom seams now. So 1024. And there's our top and bottom seam. I'm going to hit OK. And we're going to fix these. So same thing I did before. I'm going to erase these. And then I'm going to paint them back on so that they connect. There we go. Filter, other, offset, and that should set everything back to normal. And to really quick check my corner seams, I'm going to set both of these to the same. So 1024, so I'm going to hit 0, and there's my center. And it looks like those are going to all line up, which is cool. If yours does not, you'll have to go through and correct it, but it should line up by now. 1024, 1024. And this gets me back to my original position, and I'll hit OK. So now that I have this set to where I want it to be, and I know it's going to tile, we can even test it. So save as, go ahead and make our targa. Rocky slab. Diffuse, save over it. And I will re-import. And there we go. And now it's a continuous, fairly seamless texture all the way through. And if you don't want it to be as repetitive, you can change up how the rocks are. My rocks are huge, but it's okay. Jump back into Photoshop. So now that I have my cracks, I'm going to use this to make my stones. I'm going to hit a new layer, drag this under my cracks. I'm going to name this rock. And for my rock, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a gray that I like. Up here, let's grab a good gray. I'm just going to drop that in. Paint bucket, drop it in. So now I have my gray. I'm going to add some speckles. Oh, let me grab a different color. Let's grab like a brown. That'll work. That way when I speckle this, it'll have some color in it. Filter, noise. I'm going to add noise. And I'm going to do I'm going to do 15%. That'll work. I'm going to select my rocks, I'm going to select my cracks layer, come up to my magic wand tool. If you don't see the magic wand, it's underneath the lasso. Just click and hold, grab the magic wand. I'm going to hit this little vein here, and you're going to see it's going to grab everything. And this one as well. So if one of your veins doesn't get grabbed, just hold shift and then click into it and you can get it. I'm going to come over to my rock and I'm just going to hit delete. So now, if I kind of click off or I go up to select and hit deselect, I have a basic rock outline. Go ahead, File, Save As. Save this one back out as my targa, and I'll re-import this so you can see the result. So there's some basic rocks. But I don't want to stop at basic. I want to make these things look a little bit more realistic. Let's jump back into Photoshop. Now what I'm going to do is, first things first, I'm going to take away this outer edge. So I'm going to turn my cracks off. And my rocks are going to now drop off that shadow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my rock. And I'm going to add a drop shadow. So now my rocks look like they're pushing out. In my drop shadow options, what I'm going to do, let's play with this a little bit. Pull this back, pull my distance back all the way. I'm going to push my size out. Hit the spread just a little bit. Kind of like that. So if you want to see my values, my size is 35, my spread is 13. I'm just giving it so there's a little bit of a shadow on the edge here. Just so subtly. And if you want some distance, you can push the distance up. Just be aware that when you adjust the distance, it is separating from your seams here, and that will cause problems. So the reason why I set my distance all the way down to 0 is it keeps it exactly on my edges, and I know I won't create another seam. So I'm going to hit OK. So this is going to be rock. I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to duplicate, and this is going to be rock, I'll say middle. And I'm going to let that be on top of my rock. And I'm going to name my other rock bottom. I know. All the memes. So rock bottom. With my rock middle selected, I'm going to come over to my eraser. I'm going to get a brush size that's decent. So right click, get a brush, and I'm going to make sure I get a flat brush size. Don't use this little shadowy one. The soft pixels are going to be a problem if we try to texture this. So get the flat brush. And now if I very gently carve back along the edges, I get this little peeling effect, like there's layers of stone here. And I'm going to come through. This is kind of tedious, so I'm not going to do a lot of chatting here, but I'm going to go through and carve out my rocks and just sort of get it looking the way that I want. And all I'm doing here is creating a bit of an erosion effect, basically. You can use different brush types to change the way this looks so it's not always so smooth. You can use like a speckled brush to create jagged edges and whatnot. I'm just kind of doing my own thing here. And as you're going through and doing this, remember that lines in nature are very rarely ever straight. So kind of back and forth on your lines and getting some sharpness in there is fine. So there's some simple erosion on my rocks. Now I'm going to create one more layer of erosion. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to right click, duplicate layer, and this is going to be rock top. And on this new layer of erosion, I'm going to go back and carve out some other sections. Again, this is quite tedious, so what I'll probably do is just stipulate to this and kind of get the idea. And Okay. Let's say that I'm happy with this. If I were to drop this in right now, it would look pretty cool. So let's go ahead and test that. File, save as. Where is my diffuse? Right click on our texture, re-import, and bam. So there's a very quick rock. Now you do see some seams, or at least I see a couple seams here that could be fixed. This is where I mentioned along the edges you might get some shadow differences. You have to go in there and clean those up on each one of those layers. But we're going to remove the shadows in just a second and let the bump map do a lot of this work for us. Okay? Because even though we have this kind of carved out, they're kind of cartoony, and the shadows are very sharp. We don't want to bake the shadows onto our image. We want the lighting inside of Unreal to kind of generate them for us. So to do that, we're going to use a bump map. So I'm going to come back into Photoshop. And on each of these, I'm going to unclick the little effects layer. And you might be like, well, why would you do that? Now it's all flat and gray and gross and I can't see anything. Well, again, we're going to use a bump map to get our details out. So let's go ahead and select all of this. I'm going to create a group. Inside this group, I'm going to call this one diffuse. Make sure everything's inside there. I'm going to duplicate the group. You can right click and duplicate or hold Alt and just drag it down. The new group will be called Bump. And my bump group, I'm going to open it up. I don't need my cracks anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those. And then on each one of these, I'm going to do some adjustments. So on the top rock, I'm going to come up here to Image, Adjustments, Levels. I'm just going to adjust how bright or dark each one of these rocks are. I'm going to take my white level and I'm just going to bleach this thing all the way out. And then I'm going to take my lights over here and I'm going to drag it down so it's not solid white, but I'm going to bring it just off white. And hit OK. On my middle tone, I'm going to grab my middle rock, Image, Adjustments, Levels. I'm going to bleach this all the way out. And then I'm going to drag my whites down. And again, the way a bump map works is... it takes the high and low color values. All the white is going to be what's closer to you on the image, and anything that is dark is going to be further away from you on the image. So it's going to create an illusion of depth. So this is going to stick out the most, this is going to stick out the next amount, and then this one's going to be really dark. And then our grout, or our sand, is going to be the darkest. So I'm going to hit OK. Grab my rock bottom, Image, Adjustments, Levels. I'm going to flatten this off again. Come down to a gray value that is darker than this other one. Okay. Finally, I'm going to grab my sand, and on my sand, I'm going to jump in here, Image, Adjustments, Levels, and I'm going to actually flatten this the other direction. Now, I'll be consistent. I'll just flatten the whites off, and let's drag this down. And I'll make it darker than all the rest. Don't make it solid black. Some gray is fine. I mean, if you really want this to protrude out, you can flatten it off, but it's not necessary. But here's our bump, all ready and raring to go. Now, inside of Creative Cloud, there is a filter option. I don't have Creative Cloud at home, but right here on Creative Cloud, there is a 3D option that does have a generate bump map component. It's quick, but it's not the most precise. I prefer making these by hand so I can control my values before I do any weird generations. And on this bump, I want to see how this looks before I do any grace or any blurring effects. So File, Save As. And we're going to save this one out as our bump. So come down here, grab my, where are you? There you are. T_ Rocky Slab B for bump. Make sure it's a target, 24-bit. And I will save my Photoshop document. I haven't done that yet. Okay. Jump into Unreal. And I will drag in my bump. Alright. Don't forget to save frequently inside of Unreal. Save smart. Save often. So what you want to do, I'm going to kind of show you how this works as well. If you double click on a texture, it'll bring up your texture window, and under View, you have these different color channels. And this is a way to check to see what channels are available for you to manipulate. I'm going to uncheck each of these. Alright, with all of them unchecked, it shows up black. Since we didn't set an alpha, if I click View Alpha, it just shows up as white. So there's nothing in here that's useful for us to run through our bump map. So I'm going to uncheck alpha. If I check red, red is black and white. There's nothing here. It's just, there's no red value. It's just black and white. If I uncheck red, I check green, green's going to show up as black and white. And if I uncheck and then check blue, blue shows up as black and white. I know you're like, well, what's the point of all this? Well, the point of all this is we're going to use one of these color values to generate our bump map, and our bump map is a black and white image. So since we didn't set any of these specifically to a spot, any one of our color values here can be used to generate our bump map inside of Unreal, with the exception of the alpha, because the alpha has no information. You can also adjust the brightness, contrast, fall off, vibrance, and all the fancy good stuff right here in your image if you needed to. I'm going to hit my little button there. I'm going to double click on my material, that's this little green guy. Minimize this just a little bit, and I will drag in my bump. So with my bump in here, I'm going to bring this back. On my little search panel, where it says palette, search bar, I'm going to type in bump offset. And there are two types. There's an advanced, which looks like this, and then there's a basic that looks like this. The basic one is just bump offset, and we're going to be using the basic one. There are a lot of features with this, so I'm going to try to keep it simple. Alright, the way a bump works is you take your offset node, take the output value, plug it into the UVs of your diffuse channel. It's going to read an error because it needs to have some information. We've already determined that it doesn't matter which one of our color channels is going to be plugged into here, but we cannot use the diffuse channel. If I plug the diffuse channel into the height, it's going to read error. So I'm going to take one of my RGB values. Since any one of these is going to produce a black and white image, we've already determined that, I will just plug in my red value to my height, because it doesn't matter which one. It's going to take a second to generate, and when it does, it's hard to see this on a sphere. You can kind of see what's going on. But I'm going to hit my little cube here, and you can see right away the depth already taking place on this. And that is pretty far out. Look at that. We didn't even adjust anything. That's with the default values. Pretty cool. Reference plane happens to do with, I spoke a little bit about this, I believe, in the previous video, but reference plane, if I kind of hover over here, it says perceived height as a fraction of your width. And how that can be played with is by default it's set to 50% or 0.5, so it's kind of halfway. If we set this to 1, Unreal is going to read this as though the values are, I believe it's pushed in if it's 1. Let's take a look. So yeah, everything looks like it's kind of pushed in. And if I hit, and I set this to 0, things kind of pop out. And they all depend on which way you're looking. The effect that we want is for this to get popped out. So I think this is going to work. Let me drop this back to 50%, so 0.5. And actually, I think 0.5 is going to work for now, just so when our eye shifts, it'll be consistent. Now, the height ratio determines how popped out this thing is, or how pushed in it is. Unreal, by default, recommends having a value of 0.05. You can control this here, or you can drop in a constant to kind of drive this. So if I type in constant, drag that in. All this is a variable. You can name these. Under description, you can give it a name. We can call this height ratio, and it'll name it. And I can put a value in here, 0.05. And if I plug this in, the result is going to be the same as it would be had I not done that. So there it is. And if I select my bump offset now, you can see that our height ratio is grayed out because it's being driven by this external constant right here, which is fine. You can do it either way. It doesn't really care. Some folks like this, some folks like the other. For now, I'm going to get rid of this constant just so it won't confuse you. So I'm going to drop that off, jump into the offset node, and I'll set my values here, 0.03. And I'll leave it at 0.5. And once you find something you like, I'm going to be kind of happy with this as it is. I'm going to hit the checkbox. Now, if you notice that if you notice that your edges are very sharp, you can adjust those edges. So like if I were to come in here and you notice that this is warping too much, or there's too much distortion, or the height ratio is too much and you just can't get it dialed in, you can always go back into Photoshop and blur this and it'll come out a little smoother. So now that it's compiling shaders, we'll give it a minute and then we'll take a look at how it's going to be inside of the engine. Okay, it looks like everything's done compiling on that, and right here is our rock. And it looks pretty darn cool. make sure we save our work because Unreal is a little bit buggy in its early stages. I'm going to jump in here, and if I walk around, it looks like I'm standing on top of rock slabs. And this is just using a bump map. We haven't even done anything to apply a normal to it. Okay, I'm going to hit the escape. Let's jump back into Photoshop. So this is just the bump map. I'm going to show you how to create a normal map, and then I'm going to show you a specular. So the bump map is going to be generated, or the normal map is going to be generated from our bump. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. Again, you can hold Alt and then drag it down, or you can right-click, duplicate. And name this one normal. And on my normal map, I'm going to right-click, merge it. I'm going to make sure this is set to black and white. So mode, adjustments, black and white. And then I'm going to use the filter option. Now in Creative Cloud, yours is going to be up here under Filter, 3D, and you'll have Generate Normal Map. On mine, I have an older version. Mine's under here under NVIDIA Tools, but the end result's going to be the same. When you hit Generate Normal Map, you're going to get an option to invert your color. Yours is going to be a little bit different if you're using Creative Cloud. It'll be up at the very top. It'll say invert. What that does is going to make it either look like it's popping out or popping in. We want the grout to be popping in. We want the rocks to be pushing out. So I'm going to hit invert, make sure my rocks are pushing out. There's also a blurring option to kind of soften the edges. I don't have one on this older version, but my values should be fine. I'll hit OK. And this is what we end up with. Simple normal map. And if you want your rocks to have a very grainy look, you can always apply that to your normal map as well. I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm just going to save this out as it is. So File, Save As. This is going to be our Targa. And there's going to be Rocky Slab Normal. You can save quite a few in here. I'll do normal 1. In my list, you might have seen several different normals, and the reason for that is you can stack normals on top of each other and add them together or multiply them together to get various effects. So let's say one normal just gave me the height of this, and then on another normal I had cracks in my rock that were like on the surface. That could be a different normal map, and you just add those values together. I'm going to jump into Unreal. I'm going to load in my normal. Where are you? There you are. Drag my normal into my scene here. And then I'm going to bring my normal over here. I'm going to plug in my diffuse channel right here into the normal slot. Give it a second to render it. And there's our normal applied on top of our bump. And if we separate our bump off, like if I just wanted to use the normal, I can right click on the bump, break the link, and you can see what the normal does without the bump attached. Give it a second to compile. And there is our normal being applied. Okay. And the way, if you look at this, the way normals work is they talk to the normals of the actual surface, and that translates the lighting information into the surface based on the normal map. So if I glide my light here, you can see right here on the edge of the rock how this edge of the rock is catching light. but this part isn't, because it's reacting as though the surface of this really exists. Now what we're going to do with that is we're going to take this bump, I'm going to plug that back into the UVs, and I'm also going to plug my bump into the UVs of the normal. Give that a few seconds to read. And now we have a much richer effect, because you can see the inside edge of this thing is catching the light as we move by, which is really cool. Little bit of distortion going on. Okay. The next thing I want to add to this before we render everything is our specular map. So let's go back into Photoshop. I'm going to hide my normal. I'm going to grab my bump again. And a specular works in a very similar way to a bump map. It's going to take your high and low values, and it's going to generate positioning for light to appear on your map. Now the way I want to do this is I want this to look like it's very grainy. So I'm going to add a new channel onto this. So I'm going to duplicate my bump. Drop that down there. I'm going to turn my diffuse on, actually. Make a duplicate of that. Hide my other two. And you can see how this is kind of grainy. I'm going to take this, I'm going to flatten this thing off. So right click, merge group. And then I'm going to go up to image adjustments. I'm going to set it to black and white. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to image adjustments, levels, and I'm going to push my levels in, so my darks in. I'm going to bring my lights up, and I want the graininess of this to really push out. And I'm just kind of working these in until I get this granule. These really deep pits of light and dark. And then I'm going to push these lights up a little bit more. Oh, that's too bright. And what this is going to do is it's going to make the surface of this rock have a very speckly appearance. I'm not going to give really anything to the sand. I might actually just cut the sand out of this image here. I'm going to hit OK. Well, let me bring this up a little bit. I'm going to play with these. I actually like it right there. I don't like not having it so totally dark. Just bring up some softness. Okay. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to drag this into our bump copy. I'm going to rename the bump copy specular. Turn this guy back on. Let me grab this diffuse copy down here. I'm going to bring it all the way to the top. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply this all the way through. So let's see what kind of blending options we have. Drop down. Let's see what a multiply does. Let's try a screen. Woo, that's going to be too bright. How about an overlay? Overlay is going to be... I mean, we could use the overlay, but this will be way too bright, I think, for the results that we're looking for. Because up top, the top of this will be frosted, basically. It'll be blasted way too much light. So I'm going to go back to multiply. And I'm going to take this one into Unreal. So save this one out as specular. Save as Targa. And this is going to be... Let me go ahead and find my little guy here. So T_Rocky_Slab_S for specular. Go ahead and save that out. And I'm going to jump back into Unreal. Minimize this and I'll load in my specular map. Drag my specular into my material. Let's adjust this. I'm kind of picky where my wires line up. I don't like having things crisscross. When there's like 100 nodes in here, having things clean is helpful. And I'm just going to drag my specular into my specular. Let that render. And now if I glide this around and you can actually see where the light's hitting and where it's not hitting. The light is not hitting this channel, but the light is hitting the surface of this, and it's just catching. And if I zoom in real quick, it's just catching and bringing up some speckles on top of this rock. See that? And that's what the specular does, is it's just a map of where the light is going to hit and how it's going to trail over your object. So we have a very nice gloss. We can drive this value even further. Let me go ahead and pull this out. If you hold down the M key, M as in Michael, and type in, and just mouse click, you'll bring in a multiply. Over here, let's drag in a constant. So type in constant, drag one in. And I'm going to drag in an extra constant and put it up here. So this constant I'm going to drag in for metallic, leave it at 0. And this one I'm going to, for my specular, I'm going to put it into the channel A. This constant I'll put into channel B. And then I'll bring in the result of the multiply into the specular. Now as it is, nothing's really happening. But we can drive this value higher by putting some value here. So I'll put 10, just so you can see it push. And with that pushed up, you can see that the light is just really extreme in certain areas. I'm going to drop this down to 0.5. What this will do is it'll control how much this appears on here. And at 0.5 it actually comes out pretty nice. It's not as glossy as it was before. And we can also plug this stuff into roughness. Like I can take this map and stick it right into roughness. And you can look as I go over, there's like this little gleam. Whenever the light hits one of these little areas where we created speckling, when it hits it just right, it glistens in the sun. Can you see that? Creates even a more natural effect there. Now it's a little bit bright, so I will just use this multiply on both of those. So I'm going to drag the multiply also into the roughness. And you can see how the network of this is getting kind of crazy. But there is it with the roughness applied. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this multiply here. Control W will duplicate it. And I will plug these in there again. Yes. I'm going to create a new constant. And just so you can kind of see what's going on and why wire replacement's a big deal, Drag it a new constant. I'm going to pull this guy out here. This multiply and this one there so we can see where that goes. This multiply will be here with this one. I'm going to plug that into the roughness. It's almost got like a mirror finish. You can just see how playing with these different values give you different results. So, alright, so my final values are on my metallic, I have that set with a constant of 0. For my specular, I have my specular map running through a multiply. And on this multiply, I'm going to name this one specular. And on the other multiply, I'll just go ahead and name that roughness, just so you can see. So my specular is going to the specular multiply at a value of 0.5 into the specular channel. And then my roughness is a value of 1 with my specular going through into roughness. Now setting this at a value of 1 is the exact same as plugging this directly into the channel. So it's kind of redundant to do it this way, but doing it this way gives me more precise control if I want to control the value and play with it some more. I can push this up to 2, 5, 10 and get different results. And you just kind of play with the values to see what's coming up. Like right here, I don't like this little shiny piece on the sand, but that's something I'll just fix later. I'm not too picky with it right now. But overall, the results of this is decent enough. So let's go ahead, hit the apply button, and see how it runs in the game. Okay, we're back and we're loaded up. Make sure that you save your work. Go ahead and save Unreal. Also save your Photoshop document while we're here, because things crash, and in a previous attempt to record this, it did crash quite a few times, and I had to go back and do it multiples. But there is the result of our rock with the specular map applied. We have our bump map applied, our normal, our specular map kind of running through. And if we jump in the game and play with the natural lighting from our sun, this is just beautiful. If I turn my camera, you can see it just out there in the distance, how the light hits this, how the normals interpolate all that information we just baked on. And look, right here in the sun, you can see the speckles. There's like light streams over here. There's reflection there, kind of going this way. So all these things kind of working together give us a very beautiful layout. Hope you enjoyed this one. In the next video, we're going to go over how to create the grass, and then from the grass, we will also then create foliage. So it's going to be a fun video. Hope you enjoyed this one, and have a fantastic evening.